This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, a new president's management agenda is here. A tech transformation for federal healthcare systems and changing the cyber culture one person at a time. Welcome to FedGov Today in Washington, D.C., on YouTube and around the world on the American Forces Network. I'm Francis Rose. The Trump administration's new president's management agenda includes three main objectives. The PMA includes a total of 8 priorities under those 3 objectives. Margaret Weichert is adjunct professor at Georgetown University. She's former deputy director for management at the Office of Management and Budget. Lauren DeYoung-Schulman is director at the Federation of American Scientists. She's former associate director for performance at OMB. Both of you experts in the PMA, having done one for each of the administrations in which you served. Lauren, I start with you. Is there a set framework by which you develop the PMA and then the priorities underneath the PMA? What goes into formulating it?
3 big buckets that people choose from when thinking about what's going to be in a PMA. First off, and probably most challenging, is anything really obviously broken? Go back to the Office of Personnel Management when there was a security breach related to how we do security clearances. That got a ton of attention, was required to be in a PMA or otherwise focused on. We needed to get that right. Second is opportunities. Has the president said something about we need to improve veterans benefits or how we pay taxes or deliver services? Are there more policy-oriented opportunities you want to be able to deliver improvements on? And last, there's a set of perennial issues that end up in almost every PMA. Workforce issues are always going to be there. Procurement, federal data, grant making. These are all topics that we come back to for better or worse over and over again because there are always things to, if not tweak around the edges, to make massive, significant transformations on.
Margaret, is that the same steps you took?
It's actually a little different in part because President Trump, both times he won, that state of government was part of the decision-making process that many voters took. So we did a lot more top-down looking at what do the American people trust and not trust about government, where are the problems from the perspective of the voters, as well as from a fiscal standpoint, what's going to have the biggest impact on long-term economics in government. And I see some flavors of that in the current PMA.
The current PMA has a lot of things that were in yours during the Trump 45 administration, yours during the Biden administration.
Yep.
I note the discussion about efficiently deploying the buying power of the federal government by American, buy as one entity, smarter, faster, cheaper shared services, fraud and waste. Those kinds of themes, as you said, Lauren, permeate administration to administration to administration. Does that mean that there are levers that are already available to this administration and to the people in the agencies they task to go to work or continue to work on these issues?
Absolutely. There's several issues in this PMA that have a lot of continuity from the past Biden administration, the prior Trump administration, the Obama administration, where we've continued to get better at how we develop data and metrics on these topics, the kind of personnel that we've trained, understanding does it make more sense to centralize, decentralize. Some of the topics that they've come back to and I think have a lot of opportunity are around improper payments. We learned a lot during COVID and post-COVID on how to do upfront fraud reduction and manage identifications and otherwise to make sure that we were reducing improper payments. I think there's a lot around hiring priorities where new administrations want to bring in new talent that suits some of their policy issues. We did this in the Biden administration, the Trump administration. There's a lot of experience around how do you surge talent in particular areas. And then of course cyber, this has been a perennial issue for as long as there's been networks connecting computers. The challenge in this administration is to make sure they don't get caught up in musical chairs of who's doing what and actually focus on their partnership with the private sector and how to actually make progress.
When you were on this program talking about the PMA when you were still at OMB, one of the things that we talked about is there's a set of these issues that everybody agrees is bad and should be improved.
Yep.
Nobody thinks that anybody should be able to defraud the federal government.
Yeah.
What did you do to embed those ideas, the data use and the other techniques, so that it's available to this administration? I'll ask you the same thing in a moment, Margaret.
So I think one of the key things that makes any PMA successful is having consistent metrics and data that you know you're actually making progress, that are as real time as possible, and that have feedback loops where you know that if you do something, you can impact that data in some way. And then really critically, have somebody in charge who's monitoring this, who's actually holding people accountable for it, and goes to agencies to say, hey, by the way, you're behind all of your fellow agencies here. I think one of the things that we did under the Biden PMA, but also drew from others, is building up as many of those metrics and data points as possible, making them available to senior leaders on a regular basis, and where we could, report them out to the American people so that they knew where we were making progress on this. There's a lot of other factors that go into a successful PMA, but that set of consistent administrative data and management metrics is absolutely critical for them to continue to have success. They've got a lot of homework that they can build on in those areas.
There's something that you did in that area that I want to come back to, but
Yep.
Margaret, what did you do to institutionalize what you knew that the next team would be able to use?
So we did a top-down view of priorities, and then we did a lot of these bottoms-up elements. The thing that I see that's really different here, that in some ways I am a fan of, is there's a forest and trees problem. So we have so many metrics that so many players across government spend time collecting that they're not actually focusing on outcomes. They're not focusing on real change happening. And I think some of the intros here, and even what happened in the election, was a statement of, our debt is bigger than ever, our workforce is bigger than ever. There's a lot of progress that has been made, but it's a lot of singles, not even doubles. And so I think the real thing that we tried to do, and I think we put a lot of things out there that were transformational. Congress was not thrilled with some of our more transformational change recommendations to really shake things up and drive cost efficiencies and real savings. One thing I will say that we have an opportunity to do now is think about how Congress can support really making change happen. A lot of the things we measure, you can only get singles if you don't change how you appropriate for big investment projects, particularly tech projects. If you have to appropriate every year for a big tech change, tech projects don't take 1 year, they take 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so really thinking about some of that infrastructure capital for the future, I think is important. And the Technology Modernization Fund, I was sorry to see wasn't reauthorized. That was one vehicle that we had from the past that enabled us to make progress.
I want to come back to the Congress idea in a moment, but what I was referring to a moment ago that you both did regarding the goals and the outcomes that come out of the PMAs, you both attached names and even photos on performance.gov. What difference did that make in hindsight to the outcomes that you got, knowing, and that person knowing that he or she was going to be judged on what the outcomes were that they got? Lauren, I'll start with you.
So importantly, Francis, not just names and people and staff that are associated with it, names and agencies. It's actually one of the things that I'm concerned is missing in the description of this PMA is the high level goals, but agencies are the one that make it happen. Sitting at OMB, it's fun, it's a great job, I really enjoyed it. Agencies are the ones who are going to make it possible to implement any of these. So I would love to see a world where they decide to put the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture or the Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs in charge of some of these and get their agency's ingenuity, get pilots going, have some of the innovation power that comes from the agency's work and not just have it top down from OMB. There's a mix of ways of doing business here that I think could be successful if they bring those two factors together.
Yeah, and I do think, particularly around shared services, I'd say grants management, payroll, a number of things in IT, naming a specific agency and having them, and particularly the DepSec, have the ability to execute that themselves in their agencies was a proof point that showed you could get things done.
One of the elements to that end that stuck from what your team did and that your team picked up was the Quality Service Management Organization, the QSMOs. You love those, you told me that, and your team established those. is that one of the levers that's sitting there waiting for this team to take?
Absolutely. That if there is accountability, infrastructure, and leadership, you can actually get a lot done and start to consolidate things. Many of the challenges go back to Congress. Really consolidating things very often requires us to look at, the resistance to consolidation often comes from, well, in my district, there are 689 people doing X, Y, or Z. Mm-hmm. We really have to look at that. But if you've got accountability in the executive branch, you have a better shot of being able to do some of those negotiations.
We have about a minute left. Lauren, what's your view of Congress's role in helping the administration to achieve success with PMA?
I'm going to do a twofer here. One is something that's thematic throughout but missing is around customer experience, delivering outcomes for Americans. Congress can raise their hand and say, hey, I think you guys might have lessened the out here, while also recognizing their role in helping foreground customer experience and in President's management agenda. And at the same time, OMB and others need to be able to recognize there's a lot of gaps, to your point, that they can't actually follow through on unless they have Congress being an active partner in identifying authorities to combine or ways to consolidate or ways to better collaborate across the interagency.
Lauren, Margaret, it's great to have both of you here. Thanks for joining me today. You can read more about the new PMA and find a link to the memo from OMB Director Vogt and DDM Hewland on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a tech transformation for federal healthcare systems. FedGov Today with Francis Rose. We'll be right back.
But when it comes to AI, the way that we treat data is differently. It's no longer rows and columns. A lot of time it's really more vectorized store. And we shouldn't sort of treat software developer the same way that we treat AI engineer, data engineer, or even data scientists. There's so much user experience element to this. So it's more than just infrastructure architectural consideration. And the last point I'll just make is that AI has its distinctive challenges. It's very difficult to say we're now going to subdivide IT organization into a bunch of part-timers to drive that solution development.
I think everybody in government and everywhere really knows that, hey, we got a lot of data, and the problem is they can't tie that data to specific mission problems or data stewards or even to each other, other data sets. And so I think the first problem we're really going to have to solve is a cultural problem of how do we really work together, and then the data can do the same thing.
Welcome back. The Department of Veterans Affairs says it'll incorporate artificial intelligence into the tools its healthcare providers use to take care of patients. VA's National Artificial Intelligence Institute is just one component of the agency's new digital health office. Kristen McMillan is clinical market lead at Maximus. Kristen, welcome. Thanks for being on the show today. What are the tools that are available now to care providers, like folks that work at VHA, to incorporate in technology into the way they take care of people?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. Really, innovations around AI and other tech-enabled solutions have really become force multipliers across the health ecosystem, particularly in terms of solving some of the big health challenges that we're facing today. Challenges around provider shortages. I think HRSA indicated that by end of 2027, we're going to have a shortfall of about 124,000 providers, and that number is going to continue to climb over the next 10 years. And so that means providing more options and more modalities for people to get access to care. It means freeing up a provider's time to give them more capacity as well. And so there are a lot of digital tools that can help do that. And help really level the playing field for our veterans, for our military, and for our first responders. Chief among them, there are things that can make the provider's life easier. Automation in automation in the way they collate medical records and get thousands and thousands of medical records. They spend a lot of time on administrative activities instead of spending time with their patients or focusing on where that care need is. So that's one. There's more around diagnostics, triage, telehealth modalities, and on and on.
How are you seeing some of these issues affect the day-to-day workflows of the way people provide care, whether they're interacting with a patient or doing some of the administrative work that's required to come behind those patient interactions?
Yeah. So again, I touched on the automation on the provider side of the house. But there's also tools that will help with better support decisions. This is really powerful when you're in underserved communities or working in rural areas where you need to expand that provider reach. So if you've got diagnostic tools that can more easily triage or provide some decision support for things like common injuries, pre and post deployment screenings, and maybe atypical presentations of illnesses and issues, all of those things it can be handled through AI and through multiple modalities today, and they couldn't before.
I imagine it gives the provider access to information that she or he might not have had access to. 10 years ago, you had the people that worked in the office in which you worked, and that was it. Now you can access pretty much everybody through these tools, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. And at a level and scale unparalleled. And so as our world in many ways becomes smaller, we're working across time zones and geographies. Providers have a broader outreach. They can work collaboratively, more effectively, more efficiently. That allows them to focus more on the patients, less time on the care. And even things just, going in and assimilating thousands of pages of information, or looking at, scannings, for example, and being able to pick things up that would otherwise take a human, much longer to do. It really levels the playing field.
We have about a minute left. From a management perspective, maybe I guess the step above the provider, what makes for effective management to make sure that the people that are using these tools are using them to their maximum effectiveness?
Yeah. Well, obviously they need to be trained on the tool. They need to understand the power of the tools. Some of it is fear. So really overcoming that sense of fear, this is going to replace my job, and how can they enhance their role and really provide a better patient or individualized experience with that. But there also needs to be governance as well around AI. There's always going to be a human in the loop, and you're going to need to think about things like human-centered design, and understanding where that human, that patient, that veteran, where do they fit into the mix?
Kristen, it's great to have you on the program today. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
You can read more about digital solutions for clinical services on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, changing the cyber culture one person at a time. FedGov Today with Frances Rose continues in a moment.
So it's moving very, very quickly. But where we were going earlier with our conversation is that elevated trust. I think this is the tip of the iceberg. I think with AI, what we can start to see some good usage when we talk about elevated trust is we can use AI to allow us to maintain our own security controls. So I mentioned this idea that I'm Australia and you're Canada, and I want to share data with you. What if I accidentally overshare? That's what these countries are kind of concerned about, and I think that's what's limiting that trust. But if you think about AI coming in and stepping in the middle and saying, I'm about to share data with that country, it's good intent, but what you don't realize is there's sensitive material that you're beginning to share, and AI is going to cut it off and say, look, the business rules are in place, or you shouldn't do that. So I think there's actually an opportunity where AI can kind of help us govern ourselves with the data that we're sharing.
Welcome back. The first cohort of 1,000 recruits for the new tech force should be in place by the end of March, according to OPM Director Scott Cooper. He previewed the new program on FedGov Today recently. Jyoti Dugar is Chief Information Security Officer at the Center for Information Technology at the National Institutes of Health. Jyoti, welcome. Thanks for being on the program. You've brought a lot of people into organizations in the government in the technology area. What are the steps that you walk them through culture-wise to help them get comfortable with working in the government and help them get comfortable with working in the organization in which you're located?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you to FedGov. I feel that the most important part is to be honest and transparent, not paint a rosy picture, because cybersecurity is all about chaos. I tend to not let them know, oh, this is going to be a perfect day in the world. Adversaries are going to wait while you go on vacation to give you a break. That never happens. So it's important to be open, transparent, and authentic when bringing people on board in any organizations, whether it's NIH or any other government agencies. I know this year we faced a lot of chaos from the external world, but also we face a lot of chaos within the internal cybersecurity and technology worlds as well. But I feel like change starts with leadership. So as a leader, if you're able to demonstrate that you care about the people, the human side of things, you're not just looking at people for the job that they do in the organization, but you're looking at them from a whole person. What motivates them? What are their strengths? And how can we focus on taking care of the well-being of your staff? I've started to incorporate wellness tactics and actually operationalize wellness within the technology organizations. So, for example, instead of starting a meeting with, okay, so what do we need to get done today? You start the meeting with a quick 1-minute mindful meditation or a breathing technique, or just asking, how was your weekend? How are your kids? And just let people just be relaxed like we are today and be comfortable and just be at a state of a psychological safety and peace. So then when a crisis hits, because a crisis is always going to hit, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, they are much better prepared when they have their stress management techniques in place.
How do you find that approach changes the readiness and the level of performance in a critical situation?
Sure. So I believe that when you have a crisis situation in place, our brains tend to just jump at the crisis and resolve the problem, because we're always acting out of a fear, flight, freeze mode when we go into that state of chaos. It's important to understand that this is going to happen to all of us. We're just wired that way as human beings. And to take a pause and come and go take a walk, get out of the situation first, clear your mind. Emotions are based off of motion. So if you are in an emotional state that's negative or in a state of chaos, it's important to balance that by having motion. So turn the other way, do a 1-minute walk, or just go do something physically, even for 30 seconds to a minute, and then come back to the crisis. And you'll notice that your response starts to change. So you're less reactive and more responsive to any sort of crisis situation, whether it's work-related, cybersecurity-related, or even home-related.
The last time you and I talked, you used the term, and you touched on this earlier, you used the term cyber wellness. What's the definition of that, if there is one, in terms of how a practitioner should approach the work that one does in a federal agency?
Sure. So wellness is always looked upon as an option. And I feel strongly that we should operationalize wellness into cybersecurity, just because it's a high stress, high visibility field, and a lot of times you're taking for granted for the most part. If nothing happens, then nobody's really looking at the cybersecurity teams. But when something happens, then all eyes are on the cybersecurity teams. So our SOC analysts, the folks that are sitting there day and night looking at alerts, it's called alert fatigue. And it has the same effect on your body as any other physical crisis. So if someone's undergoing cancer or any other physical ailment, emotional ailments have the same effect. In fact, if you don't take care of your emotional ailments, it turns into something physical. So it's important for leaders to recognize the need to incorporate wellness into cybersecurity and technology fields, and just make it it's not optional anymore. We have to operationalize that.
You kind of anticipated my next question to a degree, which is, who are the people in cyber organizations that are most vulnerable to not having great cyber wellness that leaders should pay attention to and make sure that those needs are being met in some way?
Sure. So it's really all staff, but if you're in a technology organization, then you are more prone to stress because you're connected 24/7 to the technology outside of any other field. If you're in cybersecurity within the technology fields, you're even more connected because you're pretty much on call 24/7. Adversaries out there are not waiting for the CISO of an organization to come back from vacation. Okay, we'll attack you when you're back.
Right.
So it's important for leadership to also be available and to be approachable. We are moving away from the days of that's leadership and this is the rest of the staff, and you can't approach leadership because they're not approachable. So I've taken a lot of effort in the organization to just walk around, talk to people, create listening hours where they can come and talk about whatever they want, and there's no judgment. It's a psychologically safe zone. Even if they have complaints or constructive feedback, that's great input for leadership to use. Like, okay, so why do people feel that way? Like, why is the morale down if it is true? And what can we do about it? And show that we show the impact of leadership actually caring about the people and taking action on what we hear from staff. It's not just a listening. Oh, I hear you, but we're going to go back to doing things the way we are.
What I think is encouraging is it doesn't sound like there's a whole lot of tools or infrastructure that are required. It just requires a little bit of a level of consciousness on the part of the leader that's running the organization. Am I hearing you right?
Yes, exactly. You brought up a good point or a good word called consciousness. So I think as we're evolving as human beings in our level of consciousness, we're also evolving as leaders as well. And I think a lot of times leaders take their role for granted. One word that you can tell someone can really make a difference. I've had people come back, as you said, as I've brought a lot of people into the technology and cybersecurity worlds and into organizations, and they've come back 10 years later saying, you said one thing and I did that one thing and now, my life's changed.
Jyoti, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can read more about all the issues we talked about on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment.
For me, that's where we get to really focus on fulfilling the mission, which is giving them a solution, again, to fulfill what they might call these mandates, make them not feel as much as mandates, and something that's a force multiplier, which, and give them a single solution to where they can continue to use their other security solutions or tactical solutions that they might be using and not see any kind of latency or lack of use, in the switchover in these environments. Just a single platform that meets all these requirements with one single sign-on, one enrollment, and do it. We could even do it on multiple devices if that's what they want to do. We just want to make sure that it's secure and that it keeps them nimble.
FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.